You're listening to the Wellness Evolution Community Podcast. I'm Dr. Christine Smith, and this is where your body becomes something you understand again, because symptoms aren't failures. They're your body's most honest attempt to protect you. Each episode, we decode those patterns with root cause physiology, nervous system insight, and metaphors that make your biology feel alive, understandable, and trustworthy. You are smart. Your body is designed to heal. Let's remember how together. Welcome back to the Wellness Evolution Community Podcast, where I have a fantastic guest for you today, Dr. Jared Allomong. Dr. Allomong is one of my previous mentors and has a fantastic functional medicine office here in Longmont, Colorado, called Functional Health Center. And they do some really cool work, everything from brain scans to understanding genetics to understanding functional medicine to applying it through kinesiology, which is a way of trusting body intuition and a way of help, like the practitioner helping the client to actually be able to trust their intuition again through feeling it in their body, which I absolutely love. So thanks so much for being here today, Dr. Allomong.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christine.
I would love to just dive in. What originally got you into healthcare, and how did your path eventually lead you into what you're working with now?
Well, I was an athlete in high school, so my first introduction is like when something went wrong in my body. My parents would take me sometimes to the chiropractor, sometimes the medical doctor, right, depending on what they thought. And I had one instance when I was in basketball that I just got nailed in the side of my neck in the middle of practice, like a blind pass. And I couldn't turn my neck. I got up immediately from this. And as a 16-year-old, if you get up and you can't turn your neck, something's really wrong, right? It just doesn't happen. And my parents took me to the chiropractor, and I iced it, and then he treated me, and then he treated me the next day, and it was fine. And that was an instance where I first decided, well, this could be cool. I could do this. And so I luckily decided very early on, I decided like about a junior in high school that I wanted to go into chiropractic. And then I started my path down that course. Now, I only thought about it from like a structural perspective at that time. I had no idea that what my clinic was actually going to be today is what, is so far from just the chiropractic, the education that I first got. But that was what inspired me to do that. It was just happenstance. We love those lucky happenstance in life where we just get set down a course that obviously the universe had planned for me. And now it just opened all kinds of doors. And I know that's one thing that's great about that education is the freedom of chiropractic is being able to take basically any education you want. You have that doctorate level degree to be able to take functional medicine training, like you can study acupuncture if you want. You can study whatever you want to do field. You kind of can study that, and you have the freedom to do that. And so I've taken advantage of that in my career and studied a lot of different things and tried it very hard to implement the things that I feel most connected to and passionate about.
I feel the same way about it. It does have like such a openness to it and what you can study afterwards. And it's so funny because it's like I'll see comments online of people being like, well, this person's this type of doctor, this type of doctor. And I'm like, honestly, it's just a foundational degree. And it's like everything that you study afterwards is what truly makes it. So I love what you're doing because you're creating education and applications of clinical practice for other providers and professionals to learn how to do this. Because really, like I often say, I see the body almost like this oceanic quantum computer ecosystem that we are maintaining at all times. That's like constantly moving and changing. It's an incredibly complex information processing system that's constantly adapting every day. And I'm so curious from like your perspective with all the things that you've studied, how do you personally conceptualize the body when you are thinking about physiology and health?
That's a loaded question.
I know.
Right?
I'm
it's
excited
very
for
loaded
this answer.
question. And so I really do think of the body through different thoughts. One is what is going on with the automatic processes, the things that are hardwired to just run the way they should, right? We think about the cortisol rhythm per se, or basic autonomic nervous system functions, right? So I definitely think neuro first when I think of the body because
I start the same way.
And so this is the best way to understand it because neuro is controlling every other system of our body. But I also think of it from the simple cell mitochondria pathway of hey, what is these cells doing and what are they trying to do? And can they do it? Can they do it well? Right. And then you got to think of this as in the form of like billions and trillions of cells trying to coordinate actions. And so it's better to think of the body universally as there's an energy component all flowing through you all the time, right? And then there's some hardcore chemistry that runs every day automatically, whether you like it, you're set to do it. And this is going to go right into our genetic conversation today. And then we have, different organ systems running big global processes like detoxification, right? So you have that coordination of lots of cells coming together to function as an organ. And then we have the flow of energy, right? And instinct and how the meridian systems and how energy is supposed to flow and how cells are supposed to communicate energetically. So I tend to think very complex about this kind of stuff as we do it. But the knack of it is how do you make something so complex, something tangible and understandable and you can assess it, right? And so I think that's why there's so much complexity to treating as a whole. As a practitioner, I think it's very difficult to be an actual good functional practitioner because of the level of layered things that are happening on from our energetic level, right, to our physical chemical level, what's actually happening in the body.
I very much agree with you. And I will say that is one of the reasons that I greatly appreciate the stuff that I learned from you, is because it has allowed me to approach health in a way where it's truly supporting the fundamental root systems of the body and letting the body take care of the 11 million layers of complexity that we could never fully understand, even in 20 lifetimes. Mm-hmm. And so it's just this realization of yes, the body is finite and also it's infinite because of the molecular and microscopic nature of it all and just everything that's happening below the surface at the cellular level.
Yeah, as much as you want to use only, studies to validate what you're going to do in that hardcore Western theory, there's so much that we don't understand in the energy world, in the quantum world, that is happening, that's very real happening in our body, as well as all the chemistry, that it creates a layer of difficulty or a different, it just creates the robust complexity, right, of our human being and our human experience, right?
Yep. Could not say it better. So before we dive into kind of supplements and protocols and understanding why people react differently, you had mentioned body intuition and using kinesiology in the office as a way of asking the body questions. And for anybody where that's maybe a newer concept to them, and I know that you also look at it as basically working with an electrical grid, which I think is a very good way to explain it. Can you explain a little bit to people about how that works?
Yeah, what we're referencing is, for all of you out there, is just the idea of muscle testing. So a lot of people know the term muscle testing, but I love to refer to it as more neurokinesiology. I love looking at it in that context, and because science, if we look at the science of kinesiology, it's supported through its neurological applications. And so, I got to talk to a chiropractic neurologist about this idea, and we actually have a very good idea in the ICAK what's happening, and it's called the dorsal horn theory of why the muscle test actually goes weak when you give it a stressor. And it's all neurocircuitry, and it's very complicated, and boy, I don't want to try to explain it today, but the point of that is that there's something that happens to our body when our nervous system interacts with a stressor, and our nervous system is always saying, can I handle maintaining output even when a stressor's put into the nervous system? So that might be a light and you're shining a pen light in their eye, or doing sound in their ear, or it might be having them think about their mother and the stress that they experience with that person, right? Any of those things can create enough stress on the nervous system to shut it down. And from a neuro perspective, what we know is the sole main output of the nervous system is motor. And so they talk about through this alpha motor neuron. And so when you have that stressor overwhelm you, the nervous system gets inhibited by that motor output. So it makes sense that a muscle is a great way to test that, because it's the end result, is how much of that muscle, how much strength can you output? And now with muscle testing, we're subtly testing the nervous system more so than we're testing actual strength of your total capacity to fire that nerve. It's more of a nervous system response to it, but it's still the same principle of that nervous system getting overwhelmed and not being able to maintain output the way it's supposed to. And that's why it goes weak. And once you understand it from a neuro perspective, now it just gets broad what you can do with it and the questions you can ask and how you can use it. And people use it inappropriately all the time because they break the neuro rules of it. But when you use it appropriately neurologically, people are amazed at how accurate it can be to help you understand what's going on in your chemistry.
Yeah, it's like it's an art form, and just like anything, you have to kind of master the art form. But there are so many different ways to use it, and I love the way that you explained it. And to just kind of like recap for people, it's essentially a way that you can have a conversation with the body that is a little bit like Morse code. It's like you're getting yes and no answers and like speaking the body's language. I find like lab results are us interpreting the body's language into our language, and things like muscle testing and like different orthopedic tests are translating our language into the body's language. And so it's a way that we can have a conversation with the body at the body's level using the body's systems. And when you are treating it like an electrical circuit and then you put a resistor in the circuit, like thinking about the stress with mom or that food that you're not supposed to eat or some heavy metal or something, that resistor in the circuit then makes it so the neurological system can't have the same strength output.
Yeah, exactly. And if I had onto that, it's that idea of bioindividuality, right? That the idea of you might have a lab marker off on your blood work, but is that causing functional distress to your actual nervous system? That's a different question. So the ranges of blood work is standardized for large populations. Well, you might run for your lifelong, you might run, a marker slightly high like homocysteine. But when we try to ask, is homocysteine stressing your nervous system? It's not necessarily stressing your nervous system because your body's adaptable to it, right? Whereas another person, it could be really, really stressing the nervous system. So, the muscle test doesn't always correspond correctly to blood analysis, right? Like a blood marker range, but it's not necessarily, I don't think, meant to. It's meant to be an indicator of nervous system stress rather than actual quantitative level that we're trying, that you're trying to do a medicine.
Well, and that is the definition really of like customized care and customized medicine, right? It's like, well, is this the same for your body as it is for the 2 standard deviations of the population? Like maybe not. And also this population isn't the healthiest state. So I don't know if I really want to base all of my numbers off of the population's like 2 standard deviation numbers. But with the muscle testing, it's this way to have basically checks in between as well. Like it's really nice to be able to like see how someone's progressing without having to draw blood like every single time. And then you can also see, like I've often used a muscle test if someone's, short on funds or something, to be like, well, what one of our labs is priority based on what's showing up from the muscle test. And then we can prioritize the lab.
Yeah. If you have like, let's say you run a lab and you have 12 things out of range, right? Which one do you go after? And, one of the biggest follies is trying to go after all of them at the same time.
Yes.
Like I'm going to give you 14 things that are going to fix it all at the same time. And that's where you start, messing with that oceanic system so aggressively in multiple different ways that, as a practitioner, you're only so intelligent.
Yes,
even brilliant people are only so brilliant that they can't think about all of the ripple effect consequences of you raising this chemical or lowering the chemical in your system. So my very, very favorite thing of all the aspects of muscle testing that I do is by far checking and making sure that I'm not pushing their body too hard.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the most valuable parts of it, is because when you give something or a myriad of substances to the body, you don't know how the outcome is going to happen. And if you can check it the next time you see them and say, oh man, this really is good, or this is really stressing your nervous system, then it keeps you from doing things ongoingly that's actually hindering your body's healing process.
Because supplements are supplemental. They are a tool. They're a tool that is used at the right time therapeutically.
Yeah, and they can be a powerful tool.
Yes.
A very powerful tool. My favorite thing right now is everybody and their brother comes in on NAD, right? And, NAD metabolism. So for all of you, NAD is a very strong precursor for your mitochondria to make energy. So your cells to make energy. So it's got claim to fame. It's one of the most powerful anti-aging compounds that you can take, right? But if you over push it, the metabolism of NAD is actually pro-inflammatory to your cardiovascular system.
And if you're already inflamed there and you're already inflamed in your gut, then you're probably not running the most functional mitochondria. So you're putting a lead foot on the gas of a machine that maybe has some holes.
Yeah. So you hear a podcast, right? Because here you're listening to a podcast right now. And you hear that person talk about all the amazing benefits of NAD. So you take a whole bunch, right? Because it's like you're going to take 1,000 milligrams a day, right? And all of a sudden they come in to my office and I test them. It's just crazy weak to their system, right? And they go off NAD and then they actually feel better off of it, because even a good thing becomes not a good thing as you exceed the tolerance of the body.
Tolerance of the body, that is the best way to say it. And it's like, and you have to go in the right order of like, well, what, as we were talking about in the beginning, well, what structure supports what structure? And so it's like, if they're in a super stressed out state and their neurology is totally off, they're not absorbing nutrients very well, the NAD is probably going to not maybe be the ideal thing for their system at the time. And maybe we start with something softer.
Right, exactly. It's just a really quick hack to really raise that mitochondrial function. And there's a lot of times that your body doesn't want your energy to go up.
Yes, it will reserve your energy for specific purposes.
Yes. So I spend a lot of time talking about those circumstances when I do education and teach on what situations does your body downregulate your cellular energy production purposely. And so if you try to overcome that before you've dealt with the root cause, the underlying cause, then problems happen.
Well, we're leading so well into my next question about why people react differently to supplements and protocols, but I can't help but ask, what are the situations where your body would downregulate your energy purposely?
Well, the site research, there's a concept called the cell danger response. Dr. Navio presented this. And the cell danger response talks about a choreographed reaction that happens in our cells when it perceived a threat. And the first thing that happens in the cell danger response when you receive a threat, so you get exposure to mold or your stress is really, really high, right, is your body immediately decreases voltage potential. And because our mitochondria are little batteries, as soon as you decrease voltage potential, you become less efficient at making energy. And it's purposeful. It's ingrained in our cells to do this. And so you will continue to not have energy sufficiently until you lift the stressor. So this, I think the cell danger response explains so many aspects of why energy gets suppressed in people, and why just trying to make more energy sometimes is a solution, but sometimes isn't the right solution, doesn't have long-term good effects because of that. So, it's like root cause medicine. What is actually causing your body to suppress the energy? So anything can stimulate the cell danger response, but anything your cell perceives as a threat. So this could be a virus or bacteria. This is why you always feel like crummy when you're sick, right? Your body's being like, lay down, go to sleep, right?
It's your body saying, be quiet, sit down, lay down. I need to do some stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, hey, I'm just going to take some Tylenol and just run through my day, right? Because we're human, right? But your body's really telling you not to do that. But it's really unfortunate when a sickness happens, long COVID, for example, right, where your body hasn't relieved the stressor. Mm-hmm. So you have that consistent downregulation that's happening way longer than a week or what is the appropriate time to try to get over this. And those are the people that walk into your office, right? In my office.
Well, and you have the cell danger response from an emotional happening in your life. And so if something stressful, emotional happens, you can enter a similar state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's whatever your cells perceive as a threat. And your own mind can be your own threat.
Yes, many of us are our own worst enemy for sure. Well, this leads beautifully into what we're going to talk about next, where it's like, why do some people respond really well to certain supplements and protocols while others feel worse when doing the exact same thing?
I think a good way to describe this is I have patients that will come into my clinic and they will say, well, I don't do well on B vitamins. And this is a term that just kind of drives me nuts whenever I listen to anybody talk, because every single B vitamin has a distinctly different function within your biochemistry. Because they're all essential nutrients, we slam them together in a B complex. And we named them B vitamins because of each one of their essential roles. And if you don't have enough of that, then a disease manifests, right? Because of them. And many times they're symbiotic. They're synergistic, they work together, so you can put them together and be complex. But I don't think there's a single person that's reactive to every B vitamin, right? they're reactive to a B complex because one of those B vitamins really does something to their chemistry or pushes the chemistry in a direction that their body can't handle. And it creates a stress response every time. So this is actually very true when I'm working with people that have anxiety and stress, or I'm working with kids that are autistic. People, anytime you have nervous system overexcitement, you really need to pick the B vitamins apart based on which ones are calming to the nervous systems and which ones are stimulatory nervous system, and use them independently to work through this and help them beyond what support's really going to make a difference. But that all over pushing them together in one complex, that doesn't always work for everyone. So if you do, you're like, oh, I gotta take my multi or my B complex. Like every multivitamin on the planet is a B complex to some degree. And so if you can't handle all, some people even go as far as say, I can't handle any supplements because B vitamins are thrown into all kinds of nutrition everywhere. And that's because you have such sensitivity and reactivity. And that kind of leads us back to genetics, right? Because the genetics are kind of the snips of our chemistry. Snips in any one gene can influence how well your cell can use a very basic nutrient, or whether that's going to get backed up or if it's going to go down the wrong pathway, if you would, right? So if you're on a road system and you're trying to travel somewhere, if you take a left turn and you go down into a negative part of town, you might not feel very safe there. And the same thing is true is like if they have a blockage genetically, it might take a turn that leads to a byproduct that's really, really irritating to their nervous system.
Yep, I was one of those people. You helped me with that. Thanks for that. Yeah, when I had like a crazy mold exposure and became allergic to everything, I found out that my detox genetics don't work like everybody else's detox genetics. And I'm one of those people where mold affects me in a worse way. And then I was one of those people that was not responding well to bees. But I think because it was over pushing the first stage of my liver detox and creating these like toxic byproducts, then my liver was too tired to detox because my methylation wasn't working. So let's talk a little bit for people about like what methylation is and how it plays into these SNPs, which for anyone, if that's a new term, it's single nucleotide polymorphism. And it basically just means the code in your DNA that produces something. And that can be an enzyme, that can be another molecule in your body. But methylation is a component of like how we move molecules around. It's moving a carbon and 3 hydrogens around to make other molecules and to make our DNA more or less available. But I'd love to hear your take on how you perceive methylation, because you've spent a whole bunch of time like building an entire map of the body with it.
Yeah. My whole like technique that I teach for people is called functional methylation. So it's all about methylation and genetics in a broader sense. I probably would have named it something different if I realized how broader I would have gotten with it beyond just methylation on the genetic piece of it. But methylation is such a cornerstone of biochemistry, and it's really basic because some of the most basic B vitamins like B12, folate are essential for methylation to work correctly. So some of the very, very basic chemical mechanisms of our body run on methylation itself. So we make a methyl donor, right? So when you take methyl B12 and you take methylfolate, you're taking methylated B vitamins that then donate those methyl groups to actually make the master methylator called SAMe. And so the most famous SNP that we know of is MTHFR, right? And MTHFR has tons of research on its ability, its impact all over the place, because it's kind of the rate limiting step of whether we can recycle our methylation process. It's not necessarily about initially making the methyl donor. It's about ability to recycle it is really what MTHFR is about, and making actual methylfolate from basic dietary folate. And so every folate molecule, every B9 that we intake, right, is in a form that's not methylated.
And this is the thing where people, if they consume folic acid and they don't process it well, this is the thing that's affected.
Yeah, exactly. And folic acid requires an enzyme that is very slow in humans and actually takes multiple steps to convert it into the dietary folate you would get in just food. Right. But even the dietary folate you get food then has to be methylated by MTHFR. So, methylated folate doesn't exist in nature outside of a supplemental form. And so when people have the variant in that gene, and you can have no variants in it. You can have a single variant. One parent gave you one copy of a variant, and then you can have two variants, two copies from one from each parent. And if you have those variants in the MTHFR gene, then it'll really slow down your ability to create that active methylated folate form. Now, interestingly enough, cofactors are so important, right? They're the foundation of biochemistry. Is every enzyme of our body requires a cofactor, and every cofactor is either like zinc or magnesium. It's in basic nutrients.
What is the nutrient that drives the reaction? That's the cofactor.
Yep, that's like, and without the cofactor, without that nutrient, the enzyme can't function properly.
Yep.
So in MTHFR, the cofactor is B2.
So a lot of people take like, well, for that one it works, but a lot of people take like a bunch of B vitamins and forget all their minerals. And
Right.
then it's like, nope, you need the blend of them. And so it's learning those nuances that I think can be important.
Yeah, it's true. And some people, like I find that people are B vitamin dominant, right? I very rarely give people an actual full just multivitamin. I tend to break them apart between the B vitamins and minerals because most people have a preference. They either want more B vitamins or they want more minerals to their system. And so I tend to give it individually so I can like titrate the dosing based on what their needs are like.
Because everyone is unique.
Yeah. It gets complicated because it's way easier supplementally to just be like, hey, take this multivitamin, right? That has everything in it, right? Or even better yet, let's take this powder that has every polyphenol and every nutrient in it in one scoop a day, right? I so rarely get those to test well for anybody. And I think it's just a bombardment of nutrients on this system. And sometimes I guess it can be good some of the time.
I find it depends on what stage in healing people are at. Like if they're in a healthier state, then they tolerate those blends way better. Versus like when I was sick with mold, like I could not tolerate it at all.
Oh yeah. And I mean, you know, my perspective is dealing with just super chronically sensitive people in my office all the time. That's who gets referred to me. And those are the people that really see incredible value in kinesiology. Like if you're in really good health, you might not see the value of it near as much as that mold patient that's worked with a bunch of specialists, and they're just so sick and tired of taking the next thing and feeling crummy. And just being able to apply kinesiology alongside the chemistry is just like light years beyond what they've ever experienced before.
I mean, the main thing you helped me with when I was at my most sensitive was you basically took me off of 2 pages of supplements that other practitioners had put me on. We're like, take this one form of magnesium and nothing else. We're going to see how this goes. And it went well. So thank you.
I love doing that with clients. You know, we have a very good special relationship because I've known you for so long, and you've truly seen exactly the very concept that I describe so much. And that's why I'm actually passionate about teaching other doctors about this, is because not a lot of teachers are teaching it that way.
No, and I use it all the time now.
Right, and you see it all the time. Right, the second you become aware of something, you're like, it's like when you buy a new car, you're like, man, I didn't know everybody had, you know, a Toyota Camry, you know, and but now you see it everywhere you go, right? And that's the same thing. Once you become knowledgeable, you're like, oh wow, like someone can have a reaction to, you know, B6 in a negative way. Now you see B6 sensitivity everywhere you go, you know? And so, you know, it's important to try to keep yourself open-minded as you do this too, because that's a problem with us practitioners all the time, is that we get in our subset of what we understand. And then we think that this is how it can be. And sometimes we get a little, you know, inflexible in how we go about how you have to go about healing. I always say, if all the things, I actually tell people this all the time in my office, that kinesiology keeps me honest.
Facts. I'll agree with that. And I've regretted when I don't listen to it. And I'm like, no, they'll do fine with this. And it's like, no, their body told you.
Yeah, no kidding. Yep. Get you every time.
So when I'm like explaining methylation to my clients and stuff, sometimes like, and I've also heard other people describe it almost as like the sticky note system of the body. If it's like a way of like sending communication back and forth between cells. And then it's also like how we make our neurotransmitters. It's also ways that we like coil our DNA. But I guess like if there's something like that you really wanted people to know about methylation and kind of that more metaphorical role, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I didn't answer that question really.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. So methylation directly is involved in gene editing. So one of the coolest ways, and a lot of these companies that do biological aging, right? They use methylation. They're measuring the methylation rates of our gene.
Cool.
So methylation actually suppresses a gene's activation. So if a gene is over methylated, then it's turned off. And this makes perfect sense, right? Like you don't want eye cells being expressed in, your liver. So your body highly methylates that genetic coding so you don't make it. Though every cell of your body has the genome there to make every single part of your body. But it has to highly turn off certain gene fragments in different regions of your body. So under methylating and not being able to methylate properly is sometimes an overexpression of things you don't want expressed in your body. And so what these companies are doing is they're actually measuring how much certain locations, like a gene like CRP, is actually being methylated or unmethylated. And it's a very long, like consistent marker. And so if you've been expressing CRP, which is a pro-inflammatory mediator, if you've been expressing it for an extended period of time, then you've been under-methylating that gene and overexpressing it. And we know that that's being produced a lot in your system. And so it's much more accurate than just like a blood CRP level, but you can look at what genes are under-methylated or and figure out your biological age more or less from it, which is so fascinating.
This is why genetics don't determine our destiny. They influence our strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yep.
So you should be adapting your strategy based on, if you're creating pro-inflammatory genetics, right? Pro-inflammatory.
Or like, I don't detox as well and my sulfur systems will back up. So it's best if I don't do a lot of heavily loaded sulfur supplements and I focus more on drainage for my liver.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's really cool is you can take a genetic report, a SNP report. And this is, now there's a caveat to this. You have to know enough about it to be able to read the thing.
Yes.
Right. And so
you might need help.
You might need help. Right. So people come to me and they come in with their genetics and I can read it for them and say, oh, okay, you actually lack the ability to metabolize sulfur correctly. And so for you, you have to be really cautious about sulfur. And why that's important, if you're just listening to it, is sulfur is the foundation of detoxification. Like every supplement that you ever thought of that helps your detox pathway is probably sulfur driven, right? Milk thistle is highly sulfur driven. And we think of, oh, that's so good for your liver. Everything that you think of as good for your liver is typically like what they talk about sulfur. So it backfires with people because they just start loading more and more and more and more sulfur components on their body. And if they don't process it, then they create sulfites. And sulfites are very toxic.
Or like, I need extra molybdenum to help
right. And that's how
my sulfur.
Yeah, exactly.
And these are things I learned from all of this approach to stuff, which is just like foundational cellular physiology, which is what I love teaching people here. I just want you to know how your cells work. Like if you know how your cells work, most people can heal themselves. And it's like, it's so amazing what you can do if you just understand how your body works. And then you can get help from practitioners like ourselves, where we just give you like a little bit of a tip. And then you figure out like how your body feels with that thing and when you do need it and when you don't need it, because it can be not an all the time thing. And so I'm curious with this too, because this is one of my other favorite things about like the work that you do is your work with the brain. So like in your clinical work with all these chronic health issues, are there patterns you see again and again when it comes to stress physiology, anxiety, and nervous system regulation?
Yeah, nervous system regulation is a lot. We all have to be doing it all the time. And in my practice, I actually started my practice. My first introduction to kinesiology was a technique called neuroemotional technique. That was my very first introduction to using kinesiology, which is, I use it in a lot of context, but it's a really technique of using kinesiology to navigate your subconscious mind and your stress response. And
it's great because you can pull the emotions out when someone isn't sure what they are, because you can ask the body.
I don't know why I feel what I feel. You can just ask, which is really cool.
What's the priority?
It's one of my very favorite things. I do it even to this day, all the time. But so I always had that disposition towards looking at the psychology side of that. And when I started studying genetics, I realized that it's very predictable. Based on looking at someone's genetics, if their mind tends to run underexcited, overexcited, and what genes influence that. So far as to say, I've run papers on this concept. I designed a nutritional related to several nutritionals related to this concept, and just helping to give people support individually for those type of stress physiology. So I say that there's an anxiety kind of genetic presentation where if you have SNPs in these 3 genes, and if you want to study them, they're called GAD, which converts glutamate to GABA, our calming neurotransmitter, MAO, which controls our serotonin and dopamine clearance, and COMT, which controls our main adrenaline and norepinephrine metabolism. And so when you have variants in these 3 genes, you end up with overexcitation in your brain. You end up just being overstimulated by so much. Now, depending on where the SNP is and the most dominant ones, it might be poor stress handling, right? So you know that some people, there's always a good adage that when you get stressed out, you should like take some deep breaths before you respond, right? Go for a walk, right? But if you have COMT slow, that's very important because you actually metabolize the stress hormones at a slower rate than someone that has a moderately normal pace or even a fast COMT.
And if you drank coffee that day, since it also processes caffeine, you're going to be even more slow at clearing your stress.
Right, exactly. You're going to be more pre-charged. And so, yeah, caffeine can be very problematic for these people that are in that kind of anxiety genetics. And, we always want to say that we're this, the kind of the same, right? You're doing this, I'm going to do it too. You want a cup of coffee, I want a cup of coffee too. But how that lands on each person is completely different. And so knowing this about yourself and learning how to adapt your lifestyle for that, right? If you have slow COMT, you probably already know it yourself, but really taking that time to deep breathe and let that stress hormone calm, and it might take some time. Now, if you have the cofactors, right? Now, COMT is what we call methyltransferase. So every enzyme, when we talk about enzymes, if they end in MT, they're typically a methyltransferase enzyme. And that means that they require methyl donors to function. So they're directly correlating to methylation. And so in this context, methylation directly affects both the manufacturing of our neurotransmitters, and it actually influences heavily our stress hormone clearance too.
So not only does it make the things to run the devices, or it also runs as a device itself, but it also makes the things that make the other devices run.
Yeah. And so, for some people, they take methyl donors and they have a really relaxing effect on them. And other people, they have a very stimulatory effect. And it all kind of comes into this nuanced genetics. What's cool is I can look at their genetics and predict pretty easily which way they're going to go with that and help guide them, right? That's the point of actually working with a practitioner, is the idea of having that kind of specialty, right? Of being able to like take that information and utilize it and teach your clients how to apply this.
Yes, because then we can start to put it in the right categories. And I love the kits that you've made because it's basically like your decades plus of clinical knowledge in a kit that other practitioners can apply of like, what is the most important thing to look at? And so this is how I operate a lot in my office. But I'm so curious, when you were, and I know you're designing more kits. So you have like your functional methylation kit, and then you have an advanced one. And then you've been looking at making like a more neurological brain-based one and more of a gut-oriented one. But in the main kits that you've designed so far, when you were creating them and putting them together with these different markers that we can check almost like a lab test of like kind of just seeing what's going on chemically with the body, what were the main functional categories you were thinking about when you were designing it?
Well, I designed the first kit around methylation and all the broad chemistry, right, that methylation affects. And so it kind of lays out there's simple questions that you go through the kit. You ask, can they methylate correctly? And all the enzymes that are involved in that working correctly. So you can ask the body that. And then you go into adrenal hormones, cortisol and DHEA.
Can they do the foundational things?
Can they? Yeah, because here's the thing is if your adrenals are very depleted and you're at low cortisol, your body's very compromised. And so if you don't fix that and if you don't bring that system back online, they don't get better.
And you can't really heal a gut if you are in a state where you can't heal.
Right. And so priority might be for some people, the gut might be all the priority, but for other people, it might be the low adrenal chemistry, which is that person that if they, they get lightheaded when they stand up easily, they tend to run low blood sugar symptoms. That type of person, they get really hangry. Yeah. So if you're that type of person, then you could have lower adrenal tone. And that lower adrenal tone is what's creating a lot of dysfunction. And that really needs to be corrected for a lot of other things to heal. It's not the only thing that you need to do, but it's kind of a paramount thing. So that's part of that kit. And then I broke out into blood sugar physiology, right? Because if your blood sugar is really high, it's problematic. And then there's a huge section of my kits that are about ATP physiology, right? Can your cells make energy?
Yeah.
And so, I just finished a presentation at a conference to a bunch of doctors. I was speaking about, I think there's like 150 there. And I was talking all about lactic acid physiology. And it's fun to talk about physiology when you can immediately apply it in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really fun because I was doing a test with people. I brought a bunch of people up on stage and I started doing a pulse test because it's actually ATP formation that moves calcium around to sustain muscle contractions. So what you can do with someone is you can actually take them and just sit there and pulse the muscle repeatedly over and over and over again. And what I found clinically in my practice is that if I can pulse a muscle, like just rapid repeat pulse it 40, 50 times, they're making ATP in a muscle level sufficiently. But people that have their ATP is very low. I had like 3 people on stage where I got about 6 pulses in, boom, it goes really weak. Like if it's under 10 pulses, that you don't have enough ATP to keep flipping calcium around and you can't sustain muscle contractions. And so you fatigue. Imagine if that person's like going for a long walk, or imagine if you're, and you're exhausted every time you expend energy, right? That's the reality. It's actually a visual reality of what's happening on the inside as they try to exert too much energy. So it was a fun thing to do. And then I kind of talked about the chemistry of lactic acid and why that happens.
Well, and I love like these ways of applying this, and like in the kit, like I've gone through it many times, and I've also even tested mitochondrial function, and it was funny because it was the only thing in the kit that was off, and it was all of them. And I was like, this is unusual. And so then I checked for neuro-emotional technique on that person and checked for emotions. And there's some big family stressor. And then we cleared out the family stressor. And then we went back and the mitochondria tested strong, which I find so fascinating because it's like they can be so affected by our energetics, our field, like your stress levels,
Right.
But it's such a fun, like immediate action, like you can see the response thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And you think about ATP, I mean, it's simple hydration, right? Like
Yep.
if you're dehydrated, it dramatically reduces the ATP's ability to produce energy. So there's just so many factors influencing it that, it's not always a supplement that you need. I guess that's the point we're making there.
Absolutely. So I guess as we kind of go through the rest of the categories, I think like I wanted to bring this up because I think it's so relevant for people to understand the main systems that are important to track, because it's not what we've been taught in like diagnoses, and it's not separating out all the organ systems. It's like, how are the organs able to talk to each other? So we've talked about methylation, we've talked about the adrenals, and then there's a whole component of detox in there. Yeah. And then I believe the immune system, and then the gut and like inflammatory pathways.
Yeah, neurochemistry, right? I always say, like, when I start with any new client, I talk a lot about their mood and how their brain is functioning, because you can take supplements for detox and it's really hit or miss whether they're going to feel better with that. But if you can improve, let's say, their serotonin or their dopamine or their stress hormone clearance, they immediately feel better and you're immediately improving their life, right? And so that's why I tend to focus in that area heavily. And so there's a whole section of the kit that's designed to look at, this directly ties to methylation, but it's tied to your dopamine, your norepinephrine, your serotonin, your glutamate, the main neurotransmitters that are affecting your mood, and how those are functioning inside your body, and then kind of corresponding those to your genetics. And I spend a lot going at oxidative stress. So there's a section on oxidative stress. There's a section on cardiovascular nitric oxide physiology. Yeah. And I was just listening to a specialist on nitric oxide on my way over here, driving over here. And nitric oxide is so fascinating of a chemical molecule, but it is so directly tied to NTHFR variants, and the NOS variant in your genetics is it's one of the most predictable things I can see on a genetic report that they will have symptomatically. If you have nitric oxide synthase, which dilates your vessels, if you have variants in that gene, very strong variants, it is very predictable that your peripheral circulation, your feet, how, in your hand, how cold those extremities get is going to be extremely predictable. And that's a very big, the doctor was telling how this is the mainstay of not only cardiovascular disease, but it's the mainstay of dementia too. And I completely agree with that. I've never seen anybody come in my office that's had brain scans that has not had cerebral dementia that's come from cardiovascular, right? Everybody has hypoxia to the brain to some degree.
Well, if your blood vessels start withering away, you can't cleanse your brain or feed your brain or give it any of the things it needs.
Yeah, so that's all designed on nitric oxide physiology, which then goes back to your genetics of nitric oxide and methylation, because methylation directly influences nitric oxide production itself.
I love this because we can get so unique at like looking at the systems. And I know this might be a lot of like new terminology for people, but you're doing great, because the way that we learn this is by hearing it. And so the next thing I'd love to kind of talk about a little bit is, you had mentioned that like one of the problems is that people run these reports and then not have it interpreted correctly. So what are the biggest mistakes you see made when people are looking at their genetics reports but not understanding the biochemical context?
Well, let's talk about the field of that. I think nitric oxide is a perfect example. We actually discovered, like, the Nobel Peace Prize for nitric oxide discovery was only in like 1998 or two. It's in the 90s. Like, so our reality is that it hasn't been discovered that long. And now we have the advancements of looking at the genetics of it, and the research on it's advanced over these 25, 30 years. And so it's just kind of amazing to in the field of genetics is where it's advancing very rapidly as far as the technology is concerned. But every single person every company that's making a report is putting different energy into different philosophies, what they want you to understand from it. And so not necessarily are they thinking it from a synergistic point of view of looking at the map and where all these stop gates could be, stopping points along the roadmap could be along your physiology. It's like, do you have MTHFR? Okay, like you do, then you need to do these methyl donors, right? Do you have ApoE, which is a big gene variant for dementia risk? And it's not necessarily thinking about how these SNPs will stack on each other and if that's really a problem, right? Nigerians have one of the highest percentages of ApoE variants, but they have one of the lowest reported amounts of dementia in the world.
Wow.
And so the point is that they are anomaly, right? They have this really high event of this very predictable gene variant that's associated with dementia, but they typically have a very low industrial exposure lifestyle. So, right, the cardiovascular risk that we have, like
less
all the
Twinkies
foods
there.
Yeah, they just don't have it there. And so their diet completely overcomes their ApoE risk profoundly. And so I've cited several studies on that when I speak about how, right, lifestyle highly influences these risks. So never think of a genetic variant as a doomsday situation where you're, thought to have this end outcome always going to happen to you. But it is an opportunity to adjust. I remember when I first ran my first genetic report, I realized that I had significant variance in glutathione chemistry, incredibly important. And it explains so much of how I would be the kind of person that sometimes if I got too much chemical, like, if I went to Bath and Body Works or a place like that where I got a lot of scented stuff, I would just get more brain fog and irritation, right? And so explain that my whole life I've been kind of struggling to maintain enough glutathione action in my system. So, every day I'm taking something in that category, right? And I'm lucky enough not to have the sulfur genetics, so I can just like kind of load sulfur chemistry in my body. And for me, it's good. And so now I have much more tolerance, but I wouldn't know to do that each and every day or every other day if it wasn't for the fact that I know that I have such significant variance in that. And those variants are heavily controlled, heavily risk for many, many cancers, right? Mm. And so, here's the goal. Try to prevent that from happening to me by being well supported on a regular basis.
I thoroughly agree. And this is what I really want to teach people, right? Is it's not like health is this thing you do once and then you're all done. It's like we are this like quantum ocean vehicle that we maintain throughout our lifetime, and that might need some parts changes, or, might have a time where, like, think of it as a car that self-heals, right? But it's like if your tire has a hole, you might need to slow down so that it can self-heal for a little bit, and just realizing like where we can allow our bodies to adapt. So I'd love to touch a little bit on just translating this genetic information into like real world strategies for people. And maybe you can think of like some case studies that just are relevant to this, but like, how do genetics, labs, symptoms, and these clinical tools all come together when you're working with somebody? And I have my own thoughts too that I can share if you want a minute to think, but I also am just like,
yeah, you can even start your share.
Sure.
I'll chime in.
Like, even like I think of my own case, right, which pretty decently well, but like we didn't even heavily dive into the genetics, but we did dive into some of the snips, and this is where we saw that my methylation from being on too many methylated supplements was overmethylated, and we needed to slow it down because there is such a thing as overmethylation. And then the labs, like we ran food sensitivity tests, we ran a gut test, and I believe like a nutrient panel. And the gut was just inflamed from the mold stuff. All of my nutrients were like totally depleted. My amino acids were in the tank. My body was eating its own muscle to detox. This is why sometimes when people are going through a big detox, like having a food with a lot of protein that doesn't require a lot of digestive fire to break down can be helpful, because it allows your body to detox. And then we were able to kind of see like what systems in the body were off and what was depleted, and able to get my body to a point where it's like we started with magnesium, and then I think we started to bring in like some zinc to start to heal the gut lining, and then we started to bring in some other items to like clean up debris lightly. And then also like during that time when my immune system was down, there's like some opportunistic infections that came in and took place, and so then we gently started working with the drainage system, and then gently started working with things that could kind of move some of the infection out without overstimulating the system, and then like checking with the genetics along the way to make sure they were functioning better.
Yeah. I mean, you just use your case as an example, right?
Totally. But like, I'd also love to hear how you approach it.
Yeah. I would say approach every case individually. I first started practice thinking not who fits my model, but how can I change my knowledge to fit what the need is of the client. And it was happenstance that I kind of thought that way. I don't think I did it super intentionally, but I realized the longer now, 19 years later in practice, being like, oh, that was a really good way to approach that. And so everybody that comes in, I'm always kind of filtering through their symptoms and what they're expressing in their labs or whatever they have that to bring to me, and trying to figure out where is the biggest problem, right, that we need to tackle, and what is your biggest limitation to healing. Over methylating someone or giving methyl donors too soon can be very problematic, right? Especially if you methylate just fine.
Well, and I was in a toxic environment, so it's just moving all the toxins around.
Yeah, exactly.
Oops.
Yeah, exactly. And you think, good intention, but that's part of listening to your body. When you take something, you just naturally feel terrible, right? I don't love the idea of Hirsch reactions like that as a process of healing. I tell it to patients all the time.
That's the body being like, less, please.
Yeah, just don't do this to me.
Yeah, just less,
right?
please.
Right. So I try to avoid that as much as I can. The only time that I really support someone feeling terrible is when we know that there's a really gnarly infection in their digestive system, and we need to get it out. And so we give them some pretty really potent oil of oregano or something like that. And I'm like, this is not going to necessarily feel good for a week, but we're only going to do it for a very short period of time, right? I don't want you to suffer for more than a couple days or a week to get through that. And that's because I know it's there and I know that it needs to get out of there. So the GI tract sometimes is the first place I start with people when it's obvious, right? That's where their main problem is. For other people, I have such a strong correlation of clients that have gut related neuroinflammation. And so they have the gut access. And I do speak on this topic. I teach all the doctors that I teach on LPS physiology. And what that stands for is lipopolysaccharide. These are toxins made by certain bacteria and gram-negative bacteria. And so you can have an overgrowth of bacteria in your gut that make these toxins. And these toxins are well established to create inflammation in your cardiovascular system. So they actually think that heart disease is partially because of LPS. I mean, if not mostly because of LPS, because the bacteria that feed off sugar are typically LPS producing bacteria.
So it's not just the sugar that's hardening your arteries. It's also the sugar that's feeding the microbiome that is producing toxins into your bloodstream.
That's really what's happening. It's actually the sugar driving bacterial growth that makes a toxin that your immune system has to react to, that's cardiovascularly inflammatory.
And that your brain can also be inflamed by, and then you get anxious and depressed.
Absolutely. And what we know about LPS is it's neuroinflammatory. So it directly turns on the immune system of the brain. So after you have that, if you specifically feel brain fog, right, that can be that toxin hitting your nervous system. And we call them endotoxins because you're never going to stop LPS. So it's like you can't completely wipe it out because you're always going to have gram-negative bacteria in your gut. You just need to reduce the load, right? And you have check systems in your immune system of your gut to bind this toxin so it doesn't actually get out of your gut. And so, that's the classic when someone has a very leaky or permeable digestive system, it's really these toxins that need to just stay in the gut and transit through the gut, getting out into your bloodstream and wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it's like a terrible catch-22 because you get more stressed out because it's in your bloodstream, and then you get more leaky gut. And then these are the cycles that we like to help people break.
Yes.
So because I could nerd out with you on this stuff all day, but as we kind of start to wrap things up, I saved one of my favorite questions for last. And I know one of the techniques you practice is called quantum neurology. And I know a lot of people probably haven't heard of it. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about what it is and then how you integrate it with the other stuff that you do.
Yeah, QN is a neurological rehabilitation technique using kinesiology as a sensor for how tolerant your nervous system is. So, right, the easy thing is if someone gets a concussion, there's some really telltale signs they had a concussion. And you do rest, you do, dark light, you do the standard Western protocol with it. But then a month later, they're still having post-concussive like symptoms, right? And so with QN, we can actually go in and ask the nervous system, can you fire the vagus nerve in your parasympathetics and not have that create stress to your body? And what's absolutely amazing is when we observe this finding, right? You stimulate vagus nerve and they go weak. If you can use light and laser therapy to speed up the conduction of the nerve. Mm-hmm. And so you're actually speeding up the ion conduction in the nerve to bring that to threshold of fire. So you're bringing it up. So now it's like a wave. If the wave's not big enough, you can't fire the neurology. But if you can make the big wave enough, then everything keeps going and flowing. And so you use light to bring the nerve to threshold while they're firing it, and it turns the system back on. And it's pretty amazing of what you can do with QN, being able to re-stimulate and rehabilitate the nervous system.
What's one of your favorite QN success stories?
Boy, I have a lot of them, but my favorite was I had a patient that had really bad neuropathy in his feet, and he had not felt the bottom of his feet very well in a very long time. And there's a procedure that you do where you really hit the pain receptors, and you have, so I had lasers going on the back of his head. I had lasers down at his spine, at like the bottom of his spine where the nerve comes in. And I hit those pain receptors in his foot. And all of a sudden he like jumped. And I went and did that. And it was like 3 treatments. And he had a huge, huge improvement of his neurology of his foot. And he was so excited.
Wow.
And so that was one of a cool story. I mean, I have lots of concussion stories where, you know, when people have concussions, there's just so much integral like neurology that's affected there, that QN is one of the techniques that I know to do that will repair the circuitry. So as simple as sometimes you do some testing and all of a sudden this person, like when they look to their left, they get dizzy, right? And then you do the QN procedure with lasers going on, and all of a sudden they can look to their left and they're not dizzy anymore. And it's like 10 seconds later.
It's like a software update.
Yeah, you just reset the software to the system, and then you check them the next time they come in and they're fine, right? Or if they have cerebellum issues and they're falling over, right, you do something, reset a bunch of those pathways, and all of a sudden they can stand with their legs, you know, together, close their eyes, and they're not falling over, right? Those are really cool success stories, and people feel it immediately when you do that. So
cool. I love everything that is coming out in holistic healthcare and helping people realize just like how many things are available to them that maybe they've never even heard of. So thank you for talking about these. And like, if people were curious to learn more about you, or if practitioners were curious to learn this technique, where would you send them?
Yeah. So if you're curious more about like my practice and kind of connecting with that, Functional Health Colorado is my website. Functional Health Center is my office. And if you're a practitioner and you want to learn like functional methylation as a technique, you can go just to functionalmethylation.com. I teach live seminars. I have online seminars. I do telecasts too. And so it's really great. My goal is to have practitioners have just a really working functional knowledge of this biochemistry to apply and practice, right? And a lot of us, we learned the biochemistry in school, but we didn't know how to apply it.
And this goes for like every profession, every degree. Like, even if you are doing more traditional prescriptions, understanding this chemistry is like highly relevant and worthwhile.
Yeah, it's really fun when I get to speak to basically any level of doctorate, right? Or any practitioner, right? Any level of practitioner. It's really fun to just kind of teach some of these cool findings and then show how to apply them in your patient population and make it very real for them, and then be able to say, hey, this is a solution, whether it's a product that is designed specifically for the genetics and chemistry that we worked on, or if it's a lifestyle adaptation that they really need to do, something you need to do, right?
Yep. And then if we were to leave everybody with one thing you wish everyone understood about their body and their health, what would it be?
I mean, that the body is just incredibly adaptable, but it's also programmed a certain way. So when you think about your health, you're always going to have to be working on something. We're not flawless. Mm-hmm. Every single body is flawed. So we always have something to work on. The adage is figuring out what does your body need to work on. And then also to give it grace and to not take it so seriously and know that things are going to come with time.
Yes. Great advice. And yeah, just give your body patience and grace and trust.
Yeah. And listen to your intuition. I can't tell you, like, listen to your intuition. If there's one thing that I love about kinesiology is it just really helps people understand their intuition. And clients that are in my office, they always talk about how I always explain the chemistry as I'm working on it. So if someone's a client in my office for like a year or two, they all of a sudden know all these terms. Like LPS is a second term in their vocabulary.
Same.
Right. Yep. And so it's just important to feel it out. Like if you start taking something and you're feeling really good with it, right? As long as it's not like a crazy stimulant that you're like, oh, I feel good because I'm just taking a crazy stimulant, listen to that and roll with it. And if you start doing something and it feels really bad, right? And, you start doing intermittent fasting because every single doctor is telling you to do intermittent fasting and you feel terrible when you do it. That's your body telling you that it can't handle that long period of fasting.
We're not resourced enough for this, so your hair is going to fall out.
Yes, don't do it,
Yes.
right? And you probably need to seek help from someone that understands that well enough. And there's a number of practitioners that can help you with that.
Yep. And it just comes back to the foundational system. So
yeah,
thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. This was
I
really fun.
enjoyed it.
Always.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and reclaiming your health sovereignty. If you feel ready for deeper guidance and reconnecting to your inner intelligence and finally not going the journey alone, I created the Wellness Evolution community for that exact purpose, for you. It is a place rooted in education, foundational physiology, and community support where you can learn to trust your body again. Visit www.wellnessevolutioncommunity.com for a free quiz to find out where your body is at in your healing stages.